Good evening. I would like to welcome everybody out to this monumental event. I am Dr. Kelton Edmonds, Professor of History here at California University of PA, which we affectionately refer to as CalU. For those of you all who are tuning in from different parts of the country, let me tell you a little bit about CalU. I am Dr. Kelton Edmonds, Professor of History here at California University of PA, which we affectionately refer to as CalU. CalU is part of the Pennsylvania state system of higher education and enrolls about 6,800 students every year. Our campus is 35 miles south of downtown Pittsburgh. The American Democracy Project is a multiple campus initiative focused on higher education's role in preparing the next generation of informed, engaged citizens for our democracy. Under the leadership of the phenomenal Dr. Melanie Blumberg, CalU of PA was one of the first universities to pilot the American Democracy Project back in 2003. I'd like to thank everyone on the American Democracy Project committees, especially the stellar leadership of Dr. Laura Turnerman, Dr. Ayanna Lyles, and Dr. Pamela Twist. Also, I would like to thank the behind the scenes help of Ms. Cindy Spear and CJ DeJulius. I'd also like to thank the Office of Academic Affairs, the Office of the President, and the Campus Vote Project for their funding of this very important event. This is our 8th post-election forum. And this important event is where we intellectually engage and ask questions, where we gain insight and explanation from the leading experts on what we just witnessed. Indeed, as citizens of this great nation, we just participated in one of the most important components in a democratic society, voting. Our stellar panelists will enlighten us on a number of factors such as polling, trends, and the overall impact of this election cycle. They will also explain their predictions and how the election outcomes match or miss those predictions. Most importantly, we will gain understanding on what this election says about our society and our never-ending quest to form a more perfect union. Our panelists are Tony Norman, award-winning journalist and columnist for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Dr. Rachel Bidikofer, a political science professor, cutting-edge political forecaster, and she frequently appears on television all the time. Dr. Alan Abramowitz is a political science professor at Emory University and a renowned forecaster of national elections. And he's a foundational participant of this panel since its inception. Dr. Amber Gaffney from Humboldt State University is a social psychologist who specializes in social identity, group processes, and social influence. Mr. Louis Jacobson of PolitiFact is a well-known journalist covering politics in the US and a political fact checker. And our fabulous moderator for this evening is none other than Mr. John Delano, who is a renowned political and financial analyst at KDKA of CBS, and he is an award-winning journalist. He's also interviewed President-elect Joe Biden 4 times in the past 6 months. Quite a distinctive honor. All right. This is our most important post-election forum because we do this in the name of our friend, our colleague, our professor, our angel, Dr. Melanie Blumberg. She pioneered this phenomenal event back in 2003, and it's great to do this in her honor. Dr. Blumberg was a tireless advocate for civic engagement and voter participation. Cal U's fall 2020 schedule of ADP events is dedicated to her profound legacy. To speak more about Dr. Blumberg is a man who is a pillar of this forum. And he's one of my favorite panelists over the years who mixes keen insight with an unmatched sense of humor. At this time, I would like to ask Dr. Bill Benning to speak more about our beloved Dr. Melanie Blumberg.
Thank you, Kelton. Thank you, everyone. Good evening. I want to say a few words about Melanie Blumberg. She was a non-traditional student at Youngstown State University. She quickly completed her degree at Youngstown, and that's where I got to know her. She went on and earned a master's degree in political science at Akron U, and then went on and earned a PhD at Kent State, studying Congress. The reason that she selected those schools is that she continued to live in the Youngstown area with her husband, Fred, who was an air traffic controller. After she completed her PhD, Kent State hired her on a renewable 3-year contract, and that's when we could see Melanie bloom. She started the Women's Political Caucus in the greater Youngstown area. And of course, no one could ever say no to Melanie. So she rounded up all the political people, union people, political consultants, pollsters, and women. And her goal was to get the women to run for office. And she did that. She got them to run for office. But in the process, she had engaged all these people to train them on how to get elected to office. And she had great success for a number of years, leading and electing females to office in the greater Youngstown area. She went on then to get a tenure track position at, as Kelton says, Cal U, and she enjoyed most, I think, engaging her students in campaigns and teaching about campaigns, and she loved her students, and she always had students with her who were she was encouraging to be active in presidential or statewide or even local elections and politics. And that, of course, led to her involvement in the American Democracy Project, because that was their goal, was to civic engagement of students in the political process, which is Melanie's love to do that. And as part of that was the initiation and funding of this panel, which many of us here tonight have seen or participated in over the years, but Melanie was the one who rounded up all of the resources and people to get involved in this. So she would be honored to, and it's only proper that we remember her with this, and that we dedicate tonight in her memory, because she loved Cal U, she loved this project, and she loved all of you. With that, I turn it back over to Kel.
Thank you. Such a phenomenal legacy that Dr. Blumberg has left us with, and we try to do her proud. At this particular point in time, we'd like to pass it off to our moderator extraordinaire. Nobody moderates a panel quite like John Delano, who's one of the most renowned and respected figures in this region of the country. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, John Delano. Take it away from here.
You can call me doctor. I have a Juris Doctor. I guess that counts for something. Dr. Edmonds, thank you so much. And thank you to everybody. Good evening, everybody. It's so good to be with you again, although I really wish it was in the company of Mel Blumberg at Cal U. She meant so much to all of us. She was one individual who could gather us from afar, and we'd all assemble at Cal U one night in November in order to talk elections and politics and have great exchanges with students, faculty, and a whole lot of guests who used to come in to these programs. I see that we have lots of people on this particular webinar, and I'm really pleased to be part of that. I should say welcome to my attic. This is where I've been doing a lot of interviews. Dr. Kelton mentioned that I had an interview. I've had 4 interviews with Joe Biden over the last number of months. My very first one was from this attic to his basement. And we joked a little bit about that. And then when I saw him in person on September 1st here in Pittsburgh, when he came to give his speech about law and order, his first words to me was, "John, it's so good to see you out of your attic." And I started laughing. I said, "Mr. Vice President, I've been out of my attic as long as you've been out of your basement." And it was true, very true. We've got a terrific panel. This is an extraordinary group of experts who can offer insights on so many different things that happened on this election day. 148 million of us went to the polls, and that's going to grow. We're not done yet. And the question is, what did we say? What did we tell people? How did we vote? In some ways, it seems very contradictory. In other ways, it's maybe very explainable. But clearly, it did not meet certain expectations that people had. So what happened? Well, we've got the panel to tell us. I certainly don't pretend to know, although I'll share my thoughts from time to time. But I'm absolutely delighted to moderate this kind of expertise. So let me begin by asking each of our panelists for one word. I know that's hard for an academic. They want to go on and on and on. But one word to describe what happened on this election day. What happened? And then we'll come back and give them a little chance to tell us a little more. So I'm just going to go in alphabetical order, which means I'm going to start with Alan Abramowitz. Alan, what's that one word that describes what happened on election day?
Well, I have to choose one word that would describe the results of this election and where we are as a country right now. I'd say that word is divided. Divided.
Great. Thank you. We'll be back to you. Rachel Bitterkoffer, what's your one word? Where is Rachel? Did we not? I thought I saw her on at one point. Oh, well, I'll let the experts find her for us. And I'll go right to Amber Gaffney. Amber, what's the one word that describes this election?
I'm not going to use my favorite 4-letter F word, but I am going to go. I am going to go a little bit more positive than I usually do and say finally.
Finally, okay. Well, that's another F word.
It is. It's well, they both would have been positive, but it's about time. That's all I got to say.
Good. Thank you, Amber. Lou Jacobson, what's that one word?
Okay, if you'll accept a hyphenated word, non-coat-tailed.
Non-coattail. I don't know. Are you sure? Are you sure it's hyphenated? Non-coattail. Good. All right. Thanks, Lou. And Tony Norman. Tony, what's
All
that
right.
one word that describes what happened on election day?
Anachronistic.
Ooh,
Big word.
anachronistic. You may have to define that for some of our viewers. I know I feel a little anachronistic at times, but I got the gray hair here. So, all right. Did anybody find Rachel? I guess not. I'm sure Dr. Edmonds is out there looking for her. All right. Well, let me come back to Alan. Take a minute and just a minute and tell us what you meant by the word divided. How does that describe?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think what this election revealed, it's something that really isn't new. I mean, this is something that we've been seeing for quite a long time. But what we're seeing is really deep divisions in our country. There are deep divisions between red states and blue states, between Democrats and Republicans. And those have been exacerbated over the last 4 years, I think, during the Trump presidency. And what we see in the voting in this election is those divisions playing out. Joe Biden is going to end up winning the national popular vote by a pretty comfortable margin. I think it's going to end up being close to 5 percentage points, somewhere between 4 and 5 percentage points, I believe, when all the votes are counted. But when we drill down and look at the state level, particularly in the swing states that decided the outcome of this election, including, of course, Pennsylvania, the state where it got called, and Georgia, the state that is still uncalled, but I think will be shortly. What we see is that the election was much closer in those swing, and for the most part in those swing states. And we look within those swing states and we see the deep divisions in Pennsylvania, between the Democratic strongholds in the Philadelphia area and Allegheny County around Pittsburgh, and then the bright red, areas of the state. Same thing in Georgia, Metro Atlanta, increasingly Democratic. The big urban areas, the rural areas, North Georgia and other parts of the state remain overwhelmingly Republican. So even as the states that are evenly divided, we see these deep divisions between bright red and bright blue.
We will come back to you to talk about your state of Georgia down there in Emory University, because it's not over in Georgia.
It ain't over till it's over.
It ain't over till it's over. And I'm not talking the presidential election.
No, I know.
Those 2 special U.S. Senate seats up in January. Thank you, Alan, very much. Amber, your word was finally. Tell us what you meant by that.
Yes, and I would like to say the thing that I can speak academically the best about is the division part, which I completely agree with that. But just, finally, as a citizen of the United States, when we have a woman in a formalized leadership position in the White House is what I meant by finally. And, it's been way too long. So that was a bright spot of hope for some of us who spend all of our time thinking about political division. So.
I'm not going to have you use the word, but you did say the other F word. How would that apply?
Well, so I would have had to use it with 2 words and said "fucking finally," or I could have said "clusterfuck." Also, I had a few of them going, but I was trying to keep it positive, and I apologize. My mom taught me how to speak like that.
Oh, no,
I love it.
Don't blame your mother.
You'd be proud.
Thank you, Amber. Let's go to Lou. Lou, you gave us the word, 2 words, non-coattail. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so, I think Joe Biden's victory in the presidential race was quite impressive. He exceeded Hillary Clinton's votes in the battleground states, in every single battleground state, by between 14 and 40%. Trump also saw his numbers increase as well by somewhat smaller margins, 5 to 28%. So in most states, Biden's gains were bigger. And that was really enough to carry him to a victory. Particularly, he did very well in the populous urban and suburban counties. He squeezed 150,000 extra votes out of the 4 collar counties of Philadelphia, for instance. Those are counties that that have been going towards the Democrats in recent years, but that's a lot of additional votes to squeeze out of that. So the presidential race turned out quite well for Joe Biden. I don't think a lot of people would have expected Georgia to flip. Arizona was somewhat more expected, but still it's quite striking. It's only been won by a Democrat previously by Bill Clinton in '96, three-way race. So Joe Biden had a very good night. The rest of the Democratic Party did not. They have a fighting chance to get a Senate majority when they were thinking about, clearly getting one. In the House, they thought it was just a question of how many seats they would gain. In fact, they lost seats. The governor's races and other state contests were basically status quo. State legislatures, Democrats had a lot of hope to flip some of these battleground state legislatures, which could help in the redistricting process in the next year or two. And they not only didn't flip any current Republican-held chamber, but they actually lost two of their own in the state of New Hampshire. So basically, for most of the other offices that they were contesting, one would have thought going in that, like, if Biden wins by as much of a margin as he did, that would carry over to the other contests, and it just simply didn't, which is quite a striking result. So therefore, he had no coattails.
Yeah, we can get into that a little bit more. Certainly, that was true here in Pennsylvania, where there were high expectations that they might flip one of the congressional seats. Turned out two of the Democrats had really close elections, including Connor Lamb, who won by just 9,000 votes. And there was no real pickup in the state House or state Senate. In fact, just the opposite, it looks like. So we'll come back and talk. I know, Lou, that's your expertise on the state levels. So want to talk to you a little more about that. But let's go on to Tony, who introduced this word, anachronistic.
Anachronistic,
Anachronistic. So how was this election day anachronistic?
Well, basically, you had an 18th century political compromise foisted on a 21st century democracy. I mean, this election was conducted as if it was, the early 18th century, and that was appalling. We have all sorts of technological means of having to vote much sooner than we have. We countenance all sorts of gamesmanship, which party is best at gaming the system. And that party generally can win. The Republicans found out in 2016 that they could game the system, the Electoral College, in a handful of states, and basically defy the popular will. And it just didn't work this time, but it almost did. And that's unacceptable. I mean, I on election night, we all watch, and probably most of us, in mounting terror as it appeared possible, just because we didn't have the numbers in front of us. We didn't know how Pennsylvania was going to go. We wouldn't know for a week. It seemed possible there, at least, that we were going to have a second term of someone who is manifestly not capable of running this country in a responsible way. And that is the fault of the Electoral College. And if it had happened, it would have been because of that. And that's why I say anachronistic. You're taking one ancient political system and you're imposing it, on a modern populace, more than, almost 300 years later. It's unacceptable.
Well, boy, that leaves a lot of room for discussion, as all of you have just done. Tony, thank you very much. I want to come back to, again, we've raised some very interesting topics, and I want to come back to that. But as I always do at the beginning of this program, is I like to remind people of their predictions a couple years ago. And now we have some new panelists. So Amber and Tony were not part of this, but I can embarrass the other ones, and why not? So you may recall that I asked you if Trump would be reelected or not. Alan said no. Bill said no. Lou said no. So you guys were all right on that point. I then asked you who would be elected president. Alan said Kamala Harris. But you came close. You came close. Bill said Beto O'Rourke. Not quite. And Lou said Amy Klobuchar. So, I mean, you all had presidential candidates who ran, but none of you picked Joe Biden. I then asked you who would the House remain Democratic, and you all three said yes. I then asked about the Senate. And the Senate, Alan said 51D, 49R. I don't think there's any way we can get to that. I think the best is 50-50. And that's if Georgia comes through for the Democrats.
Right.
Bill said 53R, 47D, which is essentially the current
Status quo.
side, the status quo. And I suppose we could get 52-48 if the Republicans win the 2 Georgia seats. So close, Bill. Lou said 50-50. We don't know yet. It's possible, but 50-50. So before I go any further, let me give the three of you, and I'll start with Bill if you'd like. I know you are not really participating as a panelist, but I'm going to draw you in because you're such an expert on so many things. Do you have any thoughts about these predictions?
We did pretty good, I think. Yeah, I think we did overall for academics. That's pretty good. You gotta remember, this is 2 years away from the election.
Yeah.
And it was pretty good. Kudos to Alan for coming up with Harris as at least on the ticket anyway. So
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Alan, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, well, just fortunate. Then I contacted Joe Biden. I said, hey, you've got to pick Kamala Harris as your running mate because you've got to make me look good. No, I mean, it's very hard to predict who's going to win the nomination of the out party 2 years in advance. And all we could speculate about was kind of who might be running, and the nomination was remarkable. I mean, that the way that Biden won the nomination was remarkable because he was almost out of it. After Iowa and New Hampshire, he looked like he was dead in the water.
Right.
And then not only does he come back and win South Carolina, but he then goes on to sweep Super Tuesday. So winning that South Carolina primary and getting that big endorsement, from Congressman Clyburn, that was so crucial for him. And the way that he then swept after that was amazing.
Yeah.
He won states he didn't campaign in. He won states he didn't spend any money in. That's one of the remarkable things. Very unpredictable. We've never seen anything like that.
Right. Lou, any thoughts on, you still might get it exactly right on the US Senate.
That's true.
I'm rooting for you, Lou.
Thank you. I guess the only thing I would say is that I didn't choose the right person, Klobuchar, but I do think that Klobuchar and Biden are similar ideologically and stylistically. So I do feel good that I was able to put my finger on somebody. I didn't choose somebody who was going to be, far to the left, even though it seemed for a while like the Democrats might actually nominate someone like that, but they did take the more cautious, moderate path. And so I think that seemed to have worked out for him this year.
Well, thank you all for participating in this these predictive polls that we do. Amber and Tony, you will not be left off the hook because at the end of this, we'll ask you, as we will ask everybody, for predictions for 2022.
Already?
All right, can you imagine? So, well, let me return then to some of the thoughts about this election, and we've got questions that have come in. I want to try to get to as many of them as possible, but I really wanted to delve into a little more about what happened on election day. So let me ask this question. I definitely want to come back to the anachronistic word. I love that word. And I think there's some discussion we need to have about that. But I first want to ask the question that I get a lot when I'm out and about, even though I'm in my attic. I am communicating with lots of folks. And here's one of the questions I get. Why were the pollsters so wrong? Well, were they wrong? Did we misinterpret them in the media? What was going on here? Were there secret Trump voters who wouldn't tell pollsters what they were really up to? What went on? I'm opening this up. You can just wave your hand and I'll go to you first. Okay, I saw Alan first, then Lou, then Amber. Go ahead, Alan.
Well, they did get it wrong in a lot of the swing states. The national polls had Biden leading by an average of close to 8 points. It looks like I still think he's going to end up at close to 5 because there are 8 million votes still out. And over half of those votes are in New York, California, and Illinois. Right. Actually, New York has the largest trove of uncounted ballots, and they're absentee ballots, and we know they're going to go heavily Democratic. But it's still going to end up that they missed it by 2 or 3 points at least. And in some of the swing states, like including Pennsylvania, certainly in Michigan, Wisconsin, the polls were predicting pretty wide margins for Biden. 7 or 8 points in Wisconsin. He ended up winning by less than 1. So, I mean, clearly there was something wrong. I don't think it's the so-called shy Trump voter, because we're seeing the same thing. The online polls where they don't talk to a live interviewer found the same thing. What I do think, however, could be going on is that they are underestimating turnout, either underestimating turnout of these sorts of voters, non-college white voters, particularly in these swing states, or they're just hard to get to respond to surveys. I think that there's a growing mistrust of the media, and that includes a mistrust of polling on the part of many of Trump's supporters. And that, I think, is contributing to maybe a lower response rates to some of these polls that could be contributing. I would say in defense of the polls that they got Georgia almost exactly right. So they didn't miss everywhere. And that's kind of a mystery also. And they were spot on in Georgia. The late polls had Georgia neck and neck, and that's exactly, of course, where we ended up.
Thank you, Alan. Lou, you had your hand up. Thoughts on that one?
Yeah, so I totally agree with Alan on the point about not being shy per se, but just being very hard to reach. I think that the type of voter that supports Trump is somebody who's often pretty sort of open to conspiracy theories and anti-mainstream media. And I don't see why they would want to answer a poll if that's your mindset. So they're just not reaching those sorts of voters enough as they do the polls. The other sort of a short-term thing, which may have had an impact that I've heard, I didn't come up with this, but I've seen it, and it sounds like it could have a point. During the shutdowns because of the coronavirus, a lot of more sort of upper middle class, white-collar voters were working from home, and therefore more reachable by pollsters, whereas more blue-collar workers who might be more drawn to Trump were at their jobs and just couldn't answer the phone as much. And so you may have had a little bit of a bias for that reason as well. I think that's a short-term bias because of the weird situation of 2020. I think it's probably a larger issue, what Alan was talking about, but it's worth throwing in there.
Okay, thank you, Lou. Amber, you'll have to unmute yourself, but I mean, they basically, I'll use the nice word, they screwed up. The pollsters screwed up. They misled a lot of folks. What went wrong in your view?
Well, I mean, I don't know that I can add much to what Alan and Lou said, but I think a lot of this has to do with underrepresenting people in rural areas. I mean, that's really clear. If you go to a rural area, and then Alan put it quite nicely, whereas a lot of these folks, they don't have trust in science. They don't have trust in all of these things that surround pollsters. So they don't want to give their opinion as well. And they're less likely to answer the phone or to give responses to a survey. So I don't think that Trump supporters are shy by any means. I don't see it in my surveys because I survey Trump supporters. They're not shy to tell me exactly what they think. But I think finding those people in those areas is difficult, and getting them to respond is incredibly difficult. So they missed it, and they report it like nothing. So
Yeah.
Right. I think
Go ahead.
all polling, really rests upon a bedrock of trust, and I think the consensus here is that polling isn't trusted by a segment of the population that we want most desperately to hear from. That's a fundamental conflict there, and I think basically the diagnosis that has been made here is fundamentally correct. It is the Occam's razor. If every time they participate in this sort of, this media, free for all, as they think of it, and then Trump says, "Hey, it's all fake news," there's no respect there. It's being undermined everywhere, and so why would the polls reflect the reality as we understand it? Because reality has just been severed.
Yeah, but here's the challenge. They screwed up 4 years ago, right?
In a different way.
Yes. And they did it again this year. What do pollsters have to do in order to get it right? Or should we just not bother polling anymore or believing any of these folks? And by the way, Bill, I know I see you on the screen. If you ever want to comment, just wave your hand and I'll go to you. But, how do we, is there a problem that needs to be corrected, or should we just forget about polls?
Well, I'm sure there's going to be another one of these post-election reviews as we had 4 years ago. The American Association for Public Opinion Research sponsored a big study, where they tried to figure out what went wrong with the polls 4 years ago, and I
thought they had tried to correct it.
They did, by giving weighting non-college white voters to a greater degree than they had in 2016, but it wasn't enough. Obviously, I'm sure we're going to see this again. Let me say this though: polls are still very useful. It isn't just about predicting the outcome of the election, even though that's what most people are kind of looking for. They're very useful for trying to understand why people vote the way they did. What are some of the important differences within the electorate, like I was talking about earlier, the divisions? How deep are they? How are they trending? There are a tremendous amount of useful information, especially from some of the more in-depth polls that are done, like the Pew Research Center polls, like the Public Religion Research Institute polls. These are polling organizations, and of course the academic polls, like the American National Election Studies. We learn a lot from those polls, but it's not mainly about trying to predict the outcome of the election.
I got you. Yeah, Bill, did you have your hand up there? Go ahead.
Yeah, I did. I think that you have to keep in mind that what the Trump people did immediately after the election was try to discredit the polls. They said that the polls were intentionally off, that this was a conspiracy to keep their vote down and to affect the election. And so I think that's a bigger problem for polling going forward if that message circulates among that voting group that this is some sort of a conspiracy going on here. That's what they were arguing. I don't know, the day after, I think the day after, 2 days after the election.
Right. No, yeah.
Go ahead. You're saying that they missed in 2016 and then they still missed in 2020. I think one of the factors was probably that Trump was hammering away at the media and at polls and everything mainstream for 4 years. And so the goalposts kept shifting.
Yeah, good. All right, well, I know that the polling question is going to keep coming up, and Alan, you're right. I know there'll be reviews. The question is whether anything is really changes that makes 2024 any better. We shall see. Let me move on to another topic. Milwaukee, Detroit, Philadelphia, Atlanta. They share something in common.
Hmm.
Yeah. Can you imagine? The African
City.
American. I didn't put Pittsburgh in that, Tony. But the African American community, absolutely critical in these major metropolitan cities. The last I looked at the Philadelphia outcome, Joe Biden was not doing as well in Philadelphia as Barack Obama did, for example. And I'm not sure whether he had quite hit the Hillary Clinton numbers. He did much better in the suburban counties around Philadelphia than Hillary Clinton did, more than 100,000 votes more. But in the city, not quite.
I blame the rappers for that.
He didn't pick the right musician.
They get the right rapper.
So I guess the question is, I mean, we all know how key the African American vote is, and in Atlanta, there may have been a different outcome than in Philadelphia.
Right.
So in fairness, I'm not trying to bang on any one particular community. I just want to know what happened from your perspective. Did Joe Biden, even having an African American woman on the ticket, was that not sufficient? Or maybe it was sufficient in certain areas, but not in others? Just any thoughts that anybody wishes to share, raise your hand. We'll go from there. Go ahead, Tony.
I think, and this is purely anecdotal. I mean, I haven't been able to get back to Philly in months and months and months. I mean, it's my hometown. It's where I was born and raised. But I can tell you that there is a dispiritedness within the African American community in Philly, which is really, really quite deep. And so it's an uphill trudge no matter what. Now, it's a community that really did come together for Barack Obama. They really got the act together. Yeah. But I think that there are just so many distractions between COVID and just sort of an intense poverty in some communities and in Philadelphia.
What about you had the police shooting?
Yes, and I think there was
week before. People were asking me, was that going to affect Black turnout?
I think that it did in many ways, and I think that there was just sort of a sort of like a nihilism that just sort of like floated there, whereas it was the opposite in places like Atlanta, because you had dynamic personalities like Stacey Abrams, and you just had a much more positive political worldview in the African American communities. I think in Philly there's still a kind of a machine. A machine organization is still calling the shots. And I think it's much more diffused than some of those other cities where the Black population was.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. Now, Philadelphia has had Black mayors. It does not at the moment.
And they've been failures, by the way. They've been failures.
Yeah. Well, was Wilson good a failure?
He's the one that dropped the bomb on the Moon House in 1985. So yeah, I'd say that was a failure.
Can I say something about the African American vote? So overall across the country, I think African American turnout was definitely up. But turnout was up for just about every group you can imagine.
Right.
Selection.
Right. Generally.
And one of the keys, I think, though, to generating this high turnout among African American voters in Georgia was a lot of organization, grassroots organization, and traditional get out the vote kinds of operations. Those are difficult to conduct during a pandemic. And so I think where that was lacking, I think you may not have seen the same kind of increase. We have to be careful in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia because actually there's still votes out, and we have to wait until all the votes are tabulated. I know that today, I mean, this is remarkable, but and Nate Cohn, who's the election and polling guru for the New York Times, is saying that Biden's margin in Pennsylvania could reach 100,000 votes
Wow.
when all the votes have been counted.
Which is double what it is now.
45,000 now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know. We'll see what it looks like when all the votes have been counted.
Yeah.
But what is interesting also is that Trump actually improved, at least according to the polls, he improved his share of the African American vote a little bit, and the Hispanic vote by a little bit more, particularly among men. So and the national exit poll, which I mean, I don't know how much trust to put in these numbers, but they have Trump getting something like 18% of the vote among Black men, but only about maybe 8% among Black women, and Black women are the large majority of African American voters.
You know, I was at the barbershop, believe it or not, 2 weeks ago.
What do
And
they do? What do they cut? Your beard?
I trimmed up my beard, and it's already gone to shit. But my barber, I asked him, very specifically, who are you going to vote for? And he said, I don't know. And I was in shock. And he had the razor to my throat, so I really didn't, register much. But he basically, spouted all of these pro-Trump, tropes that were just outrageous and wrongs and lies. And I was so embarrassed for him. And then after I got trimmed up, I tried to correct him on some things, and he just was not open to it. It was because of all that machismo bullshit that a lot of young people are picking up on now. And it's translating into, I think a very worrisome political future, because these aren't a lot of sophisticated folks who are just sort of picking up on the fascism because they think that it's macho and they think that it's cool and it makes them feel like they're part of something, even if it's, and don't forget that before Trump became a four-letter word in the African-American community, he was lionized and celebrated in hip hop. I mean, there are like 100 songs that use him, as a synonym for wealth and class and all of that. So a lot of that is just sort of, it's like the boomerang effect. People remember their prior affection for Trump, despite the ghastly things that he's done.
Yeah.
Let me ask Amber to pick up from what Tony said, because you're the social psychologist here. I have to admit that I know very little about hip hop music. What you just told me about Trump being kind of a synonym for wealth among a certain genre of music lovers, I mean, that's pretty astounding to me. Amber, from your perspective, what's going on in the African-American community? Can you tell us?
There are a few things I'd like to pick up on. One, if we want to talk hip hop, I'm so down for that, or Bob Dylan, which I see the poster back there, two of my favorite things to talk about. But I think it's really problematic when we break down, we say the Black vote like it's a monolithic thing, or we say the Latino vote like it's a monolithic thing, because you rightfully pointed out that there are differences, like big gender differences there as well. So you have these intersectional identities that have some explanatory power there, right? And so you have, Tony brought up the machismo thing. And if you have people who feel like they're being made fun of for whatever reason, and then you're like, and they see that Trump is being made fun of and Trump is putting forth this big macho thing. And, there's all the jokes about him singing the Macho Man song as well. I get that, but that is quite appealing to people. And it's really one of the things that I try to tell folks all the time is that, like, there is a large section of the country that makes fun of the Trump family for being this gaudy, tacky thing that like tries to paint everything in gold. But to a lot of folks, that's actually inspirational, and that's an inspirational quality and something to strive to move forward. So the jokes, about rap that you brought up is entirely true, though, for people who like want to rise up out of something that can be an identity that they want to latch onto, essentially. So I think you have a lot of stuff going on, and you see that with Latino men, especially. Like that can be appealing for some Latino men as well, and for others not so much. But yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. But one of the things that, when I hear the folks say, okay, the Latino vote is in the back pocket of, Joe Biden. How the hell is that the case? You have so many different voting blocks within within different Latino communities that
We saw that. We saw that on election day.
Yeah.
The Cuban Americans delivered Florida.
Yeah.
Yep.
Alan, I saw your hand up there. Did you want to?
Well, I was going to say that that's exactly right. And the Latino vote in South Florida and in the Rio Grande Valley is very different from the Latino vote in Arizona, Nevada, and California, which remain very strongly Democratic. So I just think Latinos on the West Coast tend to be more liberal, for one thing. And I don't think we should overstate this shift in the African American vote, because I mean, Trump still lost the African American vote by a huge margin, and that was decisive in a lot of states, including Georgia. If he loses Georgia, it's more than anything else because of the African American vote. Not the only factor, but it's a big one.
And
I think
just to add to that too, I did some calculations of basically subtracting from Biden's gains over Clinton, and then subtracting Trump's gains over 2016. So showing basically who gained more on net compared to 2016, and a bunch of cities that are heavily African American saw significant vote gains, even accounting for the gains that Trump got. Charlotte Mecklenburg got 58,000 more votes for Joe Biden. Wayne County, Michigan, Detroit got 32,000 more. Milwaukee got 20,000 more. So you do see both of the candidates gaining ground, but Biden in some of those places did gain significantly more votes than new votes drawn from out of the woodwork than Trump did.
Well, that sort of helps me segue into another constituency that I want to ask you about: white working class voters. Maybe male, but not always male, in my experience. I think we said at the very outset that I think you used the word non-coattails, Lou. I mean, the fact is that Joe Biden might have been doing well among voters as a whole, but he was not bringing along certain voters to vote Democratic, certainly not out in some of the counties. The surrounding counties of Allegheny, we saw an increase in vote for Biden, for the Democrat, and an increase for Trump. But Biden was able to keep those margins relatively, less of a gain for Trump. And I think one of the questions, and we're hearing this now in this unusual, shall I use the word pissing match, between Connor Lamb and AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I don't know if you've seen some of this. The New York Times had a story on this. Now they may be pulling back a little bit, but the notion is Connor Lamb is basically saying that the left wing of the party used language that scared voters, because the Republicans picked up on that language. Trump certainly did. And in his case, his opponent, Sean Parnell, but all across the country, moderate Democrats running in states like Pennsylvania, Virginia, and others were hurt by left-wing language, defund the police, that kind of stuff. And basically urging the left wing of the party, scale it back a bit. I mean, it's one thing to debate policy, but that language is hurting us with certain communities. Anybody have any thoughts? I mean,
yes.
I'm sure everybody does. I'm going to go to Amber first, since it seems to me I get to Alan all the time. Go ahead, Amber.
Well, I mean, I have quite a lot to say about this, and there's many, many ways you can break it down. We can start talking about the language aspect of it, that I think that is important. But I think one of the other things that's incredibly important, particularly if you're looking at, people in rural areas specifically, and I go back to that because I think it's important for this election, and it was important for 2016, is you get people who, and we've heard about people who feel like they're forgotten, people with their grievances, et cetera. Whether or not those things are true, they perceive them to be true. And then in Trump, they have this person who is consistently telling them, people like you are being left out. people like you are going to suffer because of Obamacare. People like you are going to suffer from, defunding the police, et cetera, et cetera. So it creates this
Even more
situation.
explicit than that, we're going to bring Section 8 housing in to your next door neighborhood.
Absolutely. I mean, and this is beyond a dog whistle, right? But like the idea for this is that it creates the sense that they are essentially deprived, or the perception is that they feel deprived compared to some communities. And that's that type of language that Trump uses consistently. I mean, all populists use that type of rhetoric to a certain extent, but he really uses it to, weaponize those communities. And that can be quite appealing to people because they want to make sure that they're getting their piece of the pie, and those other folks aren't getting more than they think they should be set out to get, if that kind of makes sense. And I think that's one of those things that we see continue polarization. And I think the language piece that you're talking about, the threat that people feel, that's all built into that portion of it, because there's somebody who's going to come and take from people like you, and those people already think, well, I already have stuff taken from me. Whether or not they have is I'm only concerned with people's perceptions, because that's their reality.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. No, good points. Good points. I think I saw Lou and Alan. I'm sure Tony.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Lou.
Yeah. So if you look at it county by county in the battleground states, at least, which is really what I've studied most so far since the election, Biden did make some small but noticeable gains in somewhat less populated blue collar counties, taking places like Erie, Pennsylvania. He flipped. It was a Trump county in 2016. Saginaw County, Michigan. He gained votes in Brown County, Wisconsin, Green Bay, Eau Claire County, Wisconsin, La Crosse County, Winnebago County. And these are places where I think Biden and his persona, his sort of personal appeal, really helped, because he's the sort of, Joe from Scranton guy. It seems to be, legitimate. He has a certain appeal to blue collar voters, long history with unions. And that is, that I think turns out to be helpful for the Democrats in 2020. I don't know going down the road in the future if there's anybody similar to Joe Biden in that way within the party who might be running for president in the future. He's sort of a throwback candidate in that way, a sort of white working class candidate, which worked very well for him in those sorts of places, but I can't see.
Are you saying that he's likely to be the last moderate Democrat to run?
Not even necessarily moderate. I think that there could be moderates who are more upscale, but he sort of,
More moderate.
he sort of reveled in his downscale upbringings and his man of the people kind of style, in a way that I think a lot of the other Democratic rising stars of any race really haven't done so much.
Yeah, good points, Alan.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think that there's a good reason to think that Joe Biden was the only Democrat who could have won this election. When you look at the narrow margins in the swing states, and but as far as the argument between AOC and Conor Lamb, my view is that they're both wrong. And first of all, Conor Lamb didn't have a close call, and these other Democrats in swing districts didn't lose because of the fact that AOC and the other members of the squad or other progressive Democrats were taking these very left-wing positions, because they represent different kinds of districts.
Right.
AOC and the left-wing Bernie Sanders wing of the party, they all represent safe Democratic districts.
Right.
And they have to appeal to the voters in their districts if they're going to win Democratic primaries, and that's what matters in those districts.
Right.
But on the other hand, I think some progressives are wrong if they think that the policies they're advocating are what the direction Democrats need to go in right now in order to appeal to a broad cross section of the American electorate and win elections. Because what matters in terms of winning the presidential election is who can win that swing state. The way it's set up right now with the Electoral College, that antiquated institution, it's very much antiquated. I agree with that completely, but it's there. And you have to win those swing states. and you're not going to win those swing states by proposing defunding the police and taking other very left-wing, or banning fracking in Pennsylvania. And at the same time, I think that to win Congress, to win the House of Representatives, it's about the 218th seat. What's the 218th seat? It's a pretty evenly balanced district. The Democrats, win by a very narrow margin, and you're generally going to do much better with more moderate candidates. You're not going to see these very progressive Democrats winning elections in those sorts of districts, or the Senate alone. Senate's even harder because it tilts Republican.
Alan,
I would
thank
just
you.
add,
Bill, I see let me ask Bill to chime in. I see his hand up.
Okay.
Tony.
Well, I just wanted to mention how fascinated I found the use of the word socialism in Miami-Dade. I mean, everybody gave that credit for really moving significant votes. They defeated an incumbent congressman, and that significantly contributed, of course, to Trump winning Florida. Was the vote in Miami-Dade, and the Republican operatives gave that credit to the use of the word socialism in that.
Well, of course, Bernie Sanders is a democratic socialist. I don't know if does AOC call herself that? I mean,
yes.
It gives you an opportunity to go after the Democrats. I mean, that's the whole suggestion that
Yeah, but
Connor.
I mean, then you've got far right Republicans, endorsing QAnon, and
Right.
so you've got and the Democrats are trying to use that,
Yes, they did.
Yeah, I would say that this is sort of the downside of having a Big Tent party. The Democrats, honestly have people like AOC, and they have people like Connor Lamb, and they're under the same tent, and they'll agree on a lot of things, but not on everything. The current iteration in the Trump era of the GOP is not really a Big Tent party. Most of the Republicans who are moderates have left the party. Now, a lot of down ballot GOP candidates did win, but in terms of the presidential race, I mean, Donald Trump did nothing to reach out to sort of moderate voters. It was a base only strategy, and the Democrats are at least trying to have that sort of Big Tent strategy.
Amber, I saw your hand up there.
Yeah, I love this conversation because we had some data back. I presented it it's not published, but presented it in the spring. And I was curious at the state of the Democratic Party, specifically in comparison to the Republican Party, because at this point, we've had data showing the Republican Party is the Republican Party of Trump, or at least it is right now, right? Like he's fundamentally changed the identity of the Republican Party. But I was curious what the state was, or my team and I are curious what the state was of the Democratic Party. And so we had folks simply make comparisons. Democrats, we did the same with Republicans, make comparisons. So we had folks who identified as Democratic Socialists. We had folks who identified more on the moderate side of the spectrum. And we simply asked them, like, who pops into your mind as the other or the outgroup? And you would expect, if the party's not divided, the other should be the Republican Party when you're talking about an election type of context. And that indeed is what we found amongst the Republicans. We found that the Republicans, whether or not they considered themselves very, very conservative or moderate Republicans, the other for them was always the Democratic Party. But in the Democratic Party, the folks who identified themselves as Democratic Socialists, the other was the moderate faction of the Democratic Party. And then, yeah. And that was my prediction. But however, what did surprise me with these data was that the folks who considered themselves moderate were comparing themselves. I expected that they would compare themselves, or that the other to them would be the Republican Party, based on a bunch of theories that I used. However, they did that, but they also compared themselves to the Democratic Socialists. And they said those are the two groups that are the others and that are different from them. And those are the things that could split up the party, which to me, as I saw that, it's like, that shows that there's some real divisions within the Democratic Party that at some point are going to be hard to get over.
I got to tell you folks that, whenever I hear Joe Manchin of West Virginia, that's exactly how I feel. I feel that he is, what I guess they used to call them the yellow dog Democrats. He strikes me as basically a proto-Republican. I just can't understand why he isn't a Republican. And I understand it, that we are a big tent. At least I'm a columnist, but I identify with the Democratic Party. I will be considered a liberal Democrat, fairly. And so when I hear, the Joe Manchins, I really do feel that that is an alien species within the Democratic Party. But I don't feel that way about Connor Lamb. And I don't feel that way about Amy Klobuchar. I really don't. I think that they're within a reasonable, line and, a spectrum, which Joe Manchin just strikes me as such an opportunist, such a panderer, and such a bad politician, despite his longevity.
Before I go to Bill, let me just say about Joe Manchin. I have interviewed him from our neighboring state of West Virginia. He fits the mold of West Virginia, Tony. I mean, he would not necessarily be successful in Pennsylvania, but I think he does. I mean, he gets elected. He's like the only Democrat that gets elected, and it may be because he's a Republican.
He is.
Bill, you wanted to make
Well, no, I'm just going to say, Manchin's going to be the #1 target of the Republicans if it's 50-50.
Yes.
Yeah, let me say, can I say something in defense of Joe Manchin?
Sure.
So this is a guy who represents a state that Donald Trump won by over 40 points
Yes.
in 2016, and Donald Trump won again by not quite as big a margin, I guess this time, but very, very, very big margin. And he managed somehow to survive in 2018. And he voted for both articles of impeachment against Donald Trump. And he voted against confirming Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court. And he actually—
And a staunch supporter of the Affordable Care Act.
Yes, he is. And so on a lot of economic issues, I think where, West Virginians are not so conservative on some of those economic issues. I think that he will support the party. But if it comes down to a 50-50 Senate, the Democrats are going to need him, to control the Senate and to pass anything. It's going to rest on him. He's the most conservative Democrat in the Senate. So he will be a crucial vote.
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
He already put out a statement today saying that he would oppose court packing.
Right. That's not going to happen anyway.
Probably not. But, there might be some efforts to reform the Supreme Court, only if the Democrats win in Georgia. Let me move to another group that we've had some questions about. And I admit that I've not studied up on this particular group, and I'm talking about young people, those either under 25 or 29 and under, in whatever age you want to put them. In Pennsylvania, that cohort, I believe 25 and under, is 9% of the electorate. I don't know that whether in this election 9% of our voters in Pennsylvania were young or not. Do any of you have any indication? Every election we talk about, the young are coming out to vote. This candidate really inspires them. They love Kamala Harris. They're all going to come out and vote for her, or whatever. And then nothing seems to change. Did anything change in this election with respect to younger voters?
Younger voters were much more Democratic than the rest of the electorate. I mean, that's true. That's generally the case. And part of the reason why, and so, without the younger voters, I don't think that Joe Biden would have carried Pennsylvania because the margin was so close overall. Okay. And one of the reasons why younger voters are more Democratic is simply because they are much more diverse. As you look at each generation, you see that the younger the age group, the less white it is. The older age group, the more white it is. That's true even in Pennsylvania, which is a state that has a smaller non-white share of the population than most states. In Georgia, that's certainly the case. In Georgia, if you look at voters under the age of 30, they went very strongly for Biden. They went very strongly for the Democrats running for Senate. And African Americans and Latinos and other non-whites make up a majority of voters under the age of 30 in Georgia.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you, Alan. That was good. Others have thoughts about young voters? Amber, you done any studies on the young?
Just the old. No, just kidding.
I can figure out the old because I'm part of that.
There's several of us here who I think fall right into that demographic. So I think
Yeah, I mean, I think Alan kind of hit on most of the things that I would say about folks who are young and really showing up for Joe Biden is what it looked like to me, at least from the data. And some of the get out the vote efforts I know on college campuses were huge, at least on ours. I know nobody cares about California, the state of California. They care about your university, but not the state of California. But it was huge, and it was that way on a lot of college campuses. So
I should ask, I'm going to switch gears suddenly because Amber, you reminded me, I knew you were from California. Who's going to replace Kamala Harris as US Senator?
it's a really good question. I don't know. I'm so excited to see though.
I mean, the governor gets to a point and then there's a special election, I presume.
Yeah, I've seen some speculation about that.
Same, yeah. So like Xavier Becerra, like there's been a bunch who well, no, I'm not going to throw my political opinions out there. I can if you want. I like to do that, but
it'll almost certainly be a Latino. It's got to be a Latino, I think, almost certainly.
It certainly seems that way. There's but there's there's a list of predictions up right now, but from it I can't pull one out that I think is going to be, and I also don't make predictions like that. So
do any of the others want to chime in on that one? I know it was left wall, but or right, no, left. It is left, California.
The AG, there's the Attorney General, who's Latino, and there's also, I think, the Secretary of State as well.
Right.
So the speculation I've seen is that those two probably have the inside track to get the appointment, and whoever gets it will have to run in a special election at some point. I'm not sure how soon. But California is so overwhelmingly Democratic now that there's not much chance for a Republican winning there.
While we're talking U.S. Senate, let me just ask you, Alan, because you're right there in the state of Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
Any possibility that one or both of these two Democrats who are in a special election can win in Georgia? And I mean, both of them have to win to give a 50-50 tie.
Right.
We're talking about John Ossoff and Reverend Raphael Warnock, right?
Right. So the conventional wisdom in Georgia and the history of these special elections here, which we've had a number of, including a U.S. Senate special election in 2008, is that the Republicans end up winning them. However, I think there's some reason to think that it may be different this time. First of all, just the fact that the state, is so close now, and that Biden's very likely, I think, to end up winning Georgia.
Right.
And this is about control of the Senate. That's never been true before.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to have a very intense campaign here. We're going to have a lot of organizing. Obviously, there's going to be a ton of advertising going on here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the turnout's going to be strong for a special election. It's going to be a lot smaller than the turnout we just had for the general election, but it could be on a par with something like the last midterm election, which was a very high turnout for a midterm election. And we're going to have something else here. We have an African-American candidate running for one of those seats in Raphael Warnock. And that's going to help Democrats turn out the African-American vote, which has been a big problem for them in these runoff elections. So my hunch is that I think that Warnock actually has a slightly better chance of winning than Ossoff because he's not running against a true incumbent. I mean, Kelly Loeffler was appointed a few months ago, and she has not endeared herself, I think, to a lot of people with her conduct so far in that position. She had to run far to the right to compete with Doug Collins in the first round of voting, and she's spending a ton of her own money to try to win the seat. But I think the Democrats can recycle some of the very same attack ads that were used by Doug Collins against Kelly Loeffler in the runoff. So I think Warnock has a little. They're probably either both going to win or both going to lose. I mean, because it's not going to be that big a difference between the votes. But I do think I would give Warnock a slightly better shot at winning. But I think they're both going to be competitive races.
Yeah, very interesting. Do any of the others have any thoughts or comments about?
I mean, looking at that race from afar, listening to Democratic propaganda as I am wont to do. I think that this has been an incredibly enlightening election for the Black community in Georgia, especially. I think Stacey Abrams has become justifiably iconic as a result of building this get out the vote machine down there. I mean, she was in all likelihood robbed 2 years ago when she ran for governor. And yet, she's been able to, out of the ashes, build this machine. And I think that, the good Reverend has inherited probably the best piece of political real estate in the country. He's got a machine behind him that can do miraculous things. And so, at least on this end, it looks like the Dems have a better than even chance of getting the majority in the Senate as a result of this race.
Yeah, I wouldn't go that far, but there's something else very interesting that just happened here, and I don't know if you've all seen this, but we just had the two incumbent Republican senators from Georgia attack the Republican Secretary of State and call on him to resign for supposedly not conducting a fair election and
without specifics.
Without specifics, without any evidence, of course, very, very Trumpian. That's remarkable, I think. And I think what it shows is they're both so concerned about endearing themselves to the president. They're very worried that if they don't do this, that Trump won't support them, and Trump will pull out, and they might lose. But I think that that's a turnoff. I think that's going to be a turnoff for a lot of voters, because the allegations are just wild. And Raffensperger is a conservative Republican, and they're attacking him basically for running a fair election. That's what they're basically attacking him for. They said your job was to make sure that we won, and you didn't do it. Mm-hmm.
And he's been pushing back without equivocation too, right?
And other Republicans are pushing back in the state, including the governor, actually, the lieutenant governor, the Speaker of the House, the Republican Speaker of the House, and some other Republicans as well. Because after all, a lot of Republicans won in Georgia.
Right.
Same election.
I've heard it said, and correct me if I'm wrong, that part of the reason that Mitch McConnell has not thanked or congratulated Joe Biden, part of the reason that the president and his team are keeping up their non-recognition of the Biden Electoral College win and the popular vote win is because they want to keep the Trump folks riled up in Georgia in order to vote and in order to participate. Now, that strikes me as a theory. I can sort of understand it as a short-term theory, but do you keep it up until when's the election? January 6th? I mean, it's
January 5th.
So,
No.
Crazy.
I think Trump signaled that he was going to do this all along.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that
was my next question. I was segueing into what's going on here with the president of the United States. Why is he acting the way he is or doing what he's doing? Are you surprised by it? It sounds like you're not. Are you concerned about it? Does it have a downside for this country? Anyone want to reflect on this for a second or two? Go ahead, Tony.
I think it's clear, first of all, that the president has no understanding about how our government works. I mean, he is pure id. He is reactionary, and everything, it becomes sort of a personal, Ragnarok for him. There is no, he has no theory of government. He has no theory of democracy. He just sees his time in the White House as a time for self-dealing and opportunism. And so he doesn't care about the Republican Party. He just cares about staying a couple steps ahead, of indictments, staying a couple steps ahead of all the legal trouble that's waiting for him, if he's like unceremoniously thrown out of office. And so he's reacting, I think, very naturally, and the way someone who is self-interested to the exclusion of everything else would act.
But if you
It
see
doesn't make
that
it any
way-
less appalling, but that's what he's doing.
but if you see it that way, Tony, why don't his fellow Republicans, particularly in the U.S. Senate, see that way?
They're nihilists. They're, you
Bill,
know,
Bill, you
I
want
think
to
it's because the party has become so thoroughly Trumpified that they need those voters in the future. Not, it may be hurtful in terms of their own ability to win Democratic votes or independent votes in the future, but they need that base GOP support. And it looks like that base GOP support, even after the loss of the presidency, still is very much in Trump's corner.
Bill,
That's right.
Bill, you had a.
Well, I look at it from a different angle, and I think that it just shows that Trump is a rookie. Every political operator knows, who's been in politics for any length of time, the courts don't like election disputes, and they never overturn elections. So you can have a day, but for him to actually act like that's really going to be fruitful, like I said, any ward leader knows it's not going to be fruitful because it never happens. I mean, even if they find some wrongdoing, some poor sap will get indicted and get a slap on the wrist, but the election's not going to be overturned.
Well, that's absolutely right. This is not going to succeed. I don't think anyone really thinks it's going.
Well, I don't know if he
succeed.
does. That's my point. I don't know that he does.
I don't know what he thinks, but I think that Lou is exactly right about Republicans are just, for the most part, afraid to stand up against him because they see that their voters are with him. The people who nominate them, and most of them represent safe Republican districts. Keep that in mind. The only exceptions are a couple of Republicans who, have spoken out against Trump in the past, or who represent swing districts or Democratic-leaning districts. So Susan Collins, who's congratulated President-elect Biden. Well, she represents a state that voted for Joe Biden by about eight or 9 points, I think, is what the margin is right now.
She has a grievance too, Alan. She had a grievance. I mean, she had a grievance with Trump too.
Yeah, but she ran way ahead of Trump, by the way.
Well, I don't know.
She ran way ahead of Trump.
She's getting even in her own way now.
And by the way, the other Republican who ran way ahead. So if you look at, there's an extremely strong relationship between the presidential vote and the Senate vote, by the way, across the states. Very, very strong. And the same party won every single contest this year except for Maine so far. We'll see what happens in Georgia. But of the ones decided so far, the party that won the White House won the Senate seat in every case except one, and that was Maine. But Ben Sasse in Nebraska, safe Republican state, but he ran way ahead of Trump as well. So when you look at the scatter plot, those 2 points really stand out, and they've been really. So if you're criticizing Trump, actually helps you in the general election, I think. But but in a Republican primary, it can be very dangerous.
Very interesting. We have about 7 minutes, 8 minutes left, and I want to come back to Tony's original point about the anachronistic way we elect a president. Is there anything we can do about it? I know that there's this effort for that state legislatures, that different states have approved bills that would award their electors to whoever wins the majority popular vote in the nation. Now, it's a way around trying to change the Constitution, because I gather the general view is that the Constitution can never be changed to abolish the Electoral College. But it is very hard to explain, as I've had to do to foreign journalists in weeks after elections, particularly, in 2000 and again in 2016, why the winner of the popular vote does not win in a democratic country. Can anything change on that score? Tony raised this, but do you see any changes likely to happen?
You're talking about the electoral. It's called the Electoral Vote Compact, I think.
I think.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. So, the states that have approved that, and it would kick in only if enough states with a majority of electoral votes have approved it, right? But it's only pretty much states that are controlled by Democrats that have approved this.
And I think there's some question about the constitutionality.
Yeah, I mean, or whether, I don't know if it hold up in court.
If they actually did it, whether it would.
But it's not going to happen. We're stuck with this Electoral College. And, up until about, maybe 8 years ago, it wasn't obvious that the Electoral College gave Republicans an advantage. We went from 1888 until 2000 without a single misfire. In every election in 1888 to 2000, the winner of the popular vote also won the electoral vote. And then we had 2000, and that came down to a few hundred votes in one state, and which was kind of a peculiarity, an aberration. But then 2016, and we saw a big misfire. I mean, Clinton wins the popular vote by 3 million votes plus, 2% plus, loses the electoral vote by a pretty big margin. And this time, I think as Tony was saying earlier, we came pretty close. That if you switch 100,000 votes in about 4 states, it's possible that Trump would have won the electoral vote while losing the popular vote by a much bigger margin than Hillary Clinton did 4 years ago. So it's because these swing states are closer than the nation, and you also add in the 2 Senate votes to each state, right? In counting their electoral votes, so those 2 Senate votes give extra weight to these sparsely populated rural states. So that also tilts the Electoral College a bit toward, not as much as the Senate itself, but it tilts the Electoral College a little bit toward Republicans. But it's mainly because these swing states, and in the last couple of elections at least, have been so much closer than the national vote has been. And I'm not sure that's going to continue, but as long as that's the case, then it gives Republicans a chance to win the electoral vote while losing the popular vote.
The only thing I think that would change the dynamics would be if Texas becomes a fairly reliable blue state. If the Democrats have New York, California, and Texas in their back pocket before you even get to any other states, you will see Republicans saying, maybe this electoral college thing isn't that great an idea.
Right, that's true, but that's going to take a while.
Right.
That's not happening even in 4 years, or maybe even 8 years, maybe 12 years from now.
Yeah.
In 1888, since you mentioned it, Alan, that's when President Grover Cleveland won the popular vote but lost the Electoral College to Benjamin Harris.
Right.
But Grover Cleveland came back 4 years later to run for president. Anybody think Donald Trump is going to run for president in 2024?
I think he's going to talk about it.
I think he'll be a felon by then, John. What are you talking about?
I think it's prediction time.
Very close. I'm not going to ask you that question. I'll wait till 2022 for that. I'm just curious. I saw Lou's hand went up right away.
Yeah,
he might. Who knows?
Trump has such a hold on his base that if he has any inkling of doing this, I think the base would support him. It gives him something to do for the next couple of years. I think it makes a lot of sense for him.
If Joe Biden is unpopular,
Yes.
I mean, if Joe Biden is popular,
helps.
If Joe Biden, in going into 2024, Biden, has an approval rating up in the mid 50s or something like that,
True.
Then I don't think he would.
Although it's hard to see Joe Biden at age 82 running for re-election.
No, I think he may very well not run for a second term.
Yeah.
But it would apply to his successor candidate, Kamala Harris, or whoever it is.
Right. Trump's going to want to stay alive as long as he can. That doesn't mean he's going to run, but he's going to want people talking about it. He wants us to talk about it.
Right.
And it's going to freeze the field too, because who wants to, in a GOP primary, go up against such a popular president among the base?
Yeah. And he's going to have some kind of media, a major media presence, I think.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, maybe he starts his own TV station, right? There's talk. Network, yeah. All right, it is prediction time. So I'm actually, well, let's go in alpha order, and Bill, you're part of this. So, Alan, here's the 2 questions I'm asking. Who's going to win the U.S. Senate in 2022? And mind you, we have, I believe, more Democrats up than Republicans, if I'm recalling. I don't recall the exact number.
No, reverse.
Yes,
it's more
That's 2024. 2024 is a lot of Democrats up. 2022, I think there are more Republicans up, but there aren't a lot of, again, like this year, there aren't a lot of easy states for Democrats to pick up. So
here's what I want. I want a prediction as to which party wins the majority in the Senate and by what number. And then we'll just ask, can the Democrats keep the House in 2022? And traditionally in that first election during a presidential term, it tends to vote against the party in the White House, right?
Right.
Right. So, all right. So, Alan, we're going to start with you. U.S. Senate. Do you think the Democrats can take the Senate, regardless of what happens in this election?
Well, we don't even know what the party balance is going to be going into that election.
I know.
But I think it's possible that they could. I would say in a midterm election with a Democrat in the White House, I would say chances are no.
So you're going to say the Republicans will take control of the
more likely.
And you want to give me a number?
Take or keep control by a narrow margin. It won't be by a big margin. It might be, 51, 52 seats. Let's say 52-48, just to pick a number out of the air.
All right. And will the House stay Democratic?
That's hard to say. I mean, we saw what happened in 1994 in Bill Clinton's first midterm election. We saw what happened in 2010 in Barack Obama's first midterm election. And we saw what happened in 2018 in Donald Trump's first midterm election. The party in the White House took big losses in the House of Representatives. So I think the safe prediction is that Republicans will win the House in 2022.
Okay.
Of course, it depends on Biden's popularity and the economy.
Now, I don't want all those caveats. I just want the number.
Yeah, it's going to number.
So, Bill, U.S. Senate, Republican or Democrat in 22?
Same numbers last time, 53-47. And the Republicans take the House because they can, as Lou pointed out, they kept the state legislatures, and so they're going to gerrymander themselves enough seats to take the majority.
All right, good. Let's see next. Okay, Amber, you get a chance at this.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah. So will the U.S. Senate go Republican or stay Democratic?
Well, you realize
Or
I'm a
be
social
Democrat.
psychologist, right? Like I will say it depends. So there's gonna be a couple of moderators in there for sure. And I unfortunately I agree with Bill when it comes to the House of Representatives in terms of gerrymandering. Like that's some scary stuff. So, that's a kind of a
House will go GOP. Are you saying the Senate?
You're not going to pin me down on that. I say it depends, but I fear that Bill is correct on that one.
On both of them?
I don't know about the Senate, but again, it depends.
I'm not accepting that. You've got to play along.
You want to do it.
I'm just pulling a Susan Collins here right now. I'm not going to answer the question. I got this.
I have my own race to run.
Right.
All right. I'm writing in the words gutless.
That almost worked. I almost just pulled a prediction out of my ass just so you didn't call me gutless.
Well, we'll give you another shot in a minute. Lou.
So I think the easy call would be the one for the Republicans in both. However, one, the Senate map is actually not that bad for the Democrats. And
Right.
Two, part of the reason why the first midterm election for a new president tends to be bad is that they tended to have coattails, to bring up my word again. And they got a lot of seats that were kind of sketchy for them. And that was not the case. In fact, it was the opposite. And also in terms of redistricting, I did an analysis recently. More than half of the seats are either going to be drawn by a bipartisan commission, or by divided government, or in states where the state Supreme Court has ruled that there have to be fair districts. So, that will become less of a factor than we might think. So I'm going to go with my same 50-50, which would mean Democrats would keep control, but only because of the vice presidency.
Right.
And in the House, it'll be a bare Democratic majority.
All right. That's what I need. And Tony, you get the last word.
Lou has just, established the intellectual justification for my. I also believe that that the Democrats are also in building mode. They understand that they're not going to get this opportunity again, and they're going to do as much ginning up the base, getting the base excited at every opportunity. And I think that elections have fundamentally changed as of 2020 and 2018.
So you're
So
predicting a
I
Democratic
agree.
House.
I agree 50-50 for the Senate,
All right.
and Kamala Harris being the decider there. And the Democrats retain the House, but it will be a closer. It'll be too close for comfort, but they will build on that.
There's one thing we're not taking into account here. That if we get this vaccine, and this pandemic is brought under control, which I think is a good likelihood by then, that the economy really could be coming roaring back.
There you go.
And that could be that, and that would be good for Democrats at that point.
Yeah.
But we already got your prediction in, so
Yeah,
Sorry, too late.
should have
Amber.
factored that in earlier, Al.
Amber, do you want to offer something with respect to the Senate?
Not really, no, but and that's because I also don't make predictions about the presidential election. I can tell you why stuff happens, but I don't always say how, because again, it depends on things. And
Sure. All right, well, I'm not going to push you anymore.
I would see, my gut feeling is Democrats 2022 for Senate and Republicans House, but like I'm not going to stand by that 100%. So.
Right. Well, let me do this. I just want to thank everybody on this panel, and I would encourage others as well. I mean, you guys are fantastic. This was a lot of fun, and I think we learned a lot. And I know we went over by a couple minutes here, but I'm going to turn this back to Kelton, who can wrap it for us. But thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be with all of you.
Thank you, John. Always doing a great job.
Thank you.
Always.
Thank you. I look forward to being with you in a couple of years. Kelton, it's all yours, Dr. Edmond.
Okay, yeah, I would like to thank all of you all as well, all of our panelists. This is great. Mel is smiling down on us. She's pleased right now. I think we did a really good job. Thank you, John. Great as always. And most importantly, thank you to the committee and those that helped put it together. But most importantly, thank you to the audience. And we ask one last thing. We have this poll. We need feedback because this is our first time doing this in a virtual capacity. So please take a few minutes and fill out this poll that should be appearing on your screen right now. If it's not, you could find it at the bottom of the screen that says polling. But please fill out this poll so we'll know how to move forward in the future. And thank you so much, everybody. We hope that everybody is a little bit more enlightened because of this fabulous panel that we've had in this 8th American Democracy Project post-election panel. Thank you, everybody. Have a good
Thank you.
night.
Thank you very much.
Great.
Good
Thank you
night.
very much.
Thank you, Dr. Benny.
Thank you.
You're always